Hey everybody, hope you've had a good week. I know this November has been a little more stressful and depressing than normal, but what I like to do when I get down or I'm really stressed out is watch one of my favorite shows, especially around this time of year, Over the Garden Wall. Over the Garden Wall is a 10-episode sort of mini-series that aired on Cartoon Network a while ago, and it is truly one of the best pieces of animation out there. And if you haven't seen it, watch it now. Don't watch this video. Go, I think it's on Hulu. I know it was on HBO for a while. Sometimes they even stream it on YouTube during this month. But seriously, stop right now, go and watch that. But for those of you who have watched it and are huge fans like me, number one, I've got this amazing sweater. This is not a paid promotion. God, I wish I was getting paid promotions, but this isn't a paid promotion. This is from Knock Thrice. They have various amazing sweaters like this, Over the Garden Wall themed, and this is seriously one of the best sweaters. But that's not like a promotional thing. This is really just, my opinion. But today's episode is going to be going into some of the lost episodes of Over the Garden Wall. And I know that that's not something that sounds like, it would really be a thing. Over the Garden Wall is a very well done and well set up series that has a lot of great connections throughout and feels very cohesive. So the idea of there being lost episodes doesn't really make that much sense. Well, there is actually a very interesting reason why these lost episodes exist, or at least the ideas of them exist. Over the Garden Wall actually started as a short film called Tomb of the Unknown. Uh-oh. Well, I'm sorry. You're gonna have to deal with that for the first half of this video. I feel so stupid. It followed Wirt, Beatrice, and Greg searching through the unknown for the Tomb of the Unknown, a book that allegedly has every story ever told, or something along those lines. And it was very well done, and it got picked up by Cartoon Network, and a few things are a bit similar and different about it. We're actually going to get into it. So this entire episode is available on YouTube, so I'll sort of skim over it. In this pilot episode, they're sort of just wandering around the unknown. And they end up meeting this guy, John Crops, who has a crop car. They go to this big party and with all these vegetable people, and the vegetable people get attacked by crows, and Greg is able to scare them off with his scream because he sees a goose and he gets so excited that he just starts screaming at such a high pitch that it drives all the crows away. That's a very oversimplification of the episode and its plot. Tonally, it's a lot more comedic, I would say, than the main Over the Garden Wall series. There's several really good exchanges between Beatrice and Wirt, which also, in terms of voice actors, Wirt and Greg share the same voice actors as they do in Over the Garden Wall, but Beatrice has a different voice actress, which I thought was very interesting. And it's not necessarily that one is better than the other. I just know I am much more used to the current Beatrice voice actress rather than the other one. However, she still does a great job. Tomb of the Unknown was originally created, at least the concept of it, closely after Patrick McHale graduated from college. He tried shopping it around and pitching it to different places. He ended up pitching it to Cartoon Network, and at that time, Cartoon Network was considering making a division to fully work on feature films. However, this never really came to fruition. But it's interesting to think about that this almost could have been a fully feature-length film set in the unknown, which, if you look at Over the Garden Wall as a whole, 10 episodes, 10 minutes, that chalks up to about a little over 90 minutes, which is feature length. I really, personally, when I like to rewatch the show, I'll watch it all at once as if it's a movie. Cartoon Network did actually ask him if he could adapt Tomb of the Unknown into a feature-length film. However, it doesn't say exactly why, but these sort of fell through, possibly because he envisioned this as a series and sort of a day in the life, where are we going next, what's this new weird location, and that wouldn't really transfer well to film. Basically, after saying that he doesn't think the show would work as a feature-length film, he actually laid it out as a 3-season show. However, this was put on the back burner when McHale joined the creative team behind Adventure Time, which that's something I didn't know. So a few years later, the Cartoon Network seemed to really like McHale and a lot of the work that he had done on Adventure Time, so they asked him to pitch a project. He ended up pitching Tomb of the Unknown once again, but he didn't really expect it to go anywhere or expect to have a big role in it creatively, because to this point he had only really produced a few short films. However, the short was so positively received that they ended up saying right then and there, let's make a miniseries. At first, it was going to be an 18-episode miniseries, but due to time constraints, it had to be cut down. All of the main characters, being Beatrice, Wirt, and Greg, were kept, but the overall plot of trying to find this Tomb of the Unknown, and that was abandoned because they felt it wasn't flexible enough to fit within a short mini-series. So they decided to go with this very simple plot of trying to go home because they felt that that gave them the most room to put as much into this world as possible without really constraining themselves. And I think that's a good compromise. As interested as I am in finding this Tomb of the Unknown and all the mysteries there, I do think the thing that makes Over the Garden Wall so beautiful is that it's simple. It's about two brothers wanting to go home and exploring this strange world. And that's why it works so well in only 10 episodes. Then, the series itself was retitled to Over the Garden Wall. But here's the very interesting thing. In the short time before they had abandoned the idea of it still being Tomb of the Unknown, they actually outlined quite a few episodes. And these can be found in the various art books and interviews of the show, and they're all very, very interesting. So we're going to go over the episodes that we know about of what could have been Tomb of the Unknown. So first, we're going to get into the pilot, which was entitled Little Black Train. In this pilot, it once again opens on Halloween night. Wirt and Greg accidentally get on a train headed towards the afterlife. They end up getting off in a place called the Unknown, a mysterious middle area between life and death. They quickly realize that it's almost impossible to get home. They have no idea how. They end up meeting a nice woodsman as well as his friend Beatrice, a bluebird. The woodsman tells them that the only way for them to escape is by living out all the chapters in this mysterious book called the Tome of the Unknown, and that when they reach the end of the story, they'll find their way home. I think this setup of making it much more clear that this is the afterlife from the get-go is very interesting. It's a lot more straightforward than the traditional series, and I feel like the main series, what makes it so great is that mystery of trying to figure out what's going on. At first you're like, are these two kids just like pilgrim people who live in this world and they just got lost? But then you hear Wirt mention, hey, is there a phone in here? Weird things like that helped you put together that mystery, and that's one of my favorite things about the show. The second episode, titled Bluebird of Happiness, follows them trying to get through the first chapter of the Tomb of the Unknown, which the chapter itself is said to revolve around a woman who sings to lure travelers into tall grass where a beast devours them, which is clearly a reference to sirens and those kinds of mermaid legends of them singing to lure sailors to their death kind of thing. In this episode, Beatrice would get very, very upset with Wirt and Greg. Greg would be goofing off the whole time and eventually find his frog, and Wirt would not take any of the superstitions in this world seriously at all. This would lead to her basically abandoning them, being like, I'm done, you guys can figure it out on your own if you're not going to take it seriously. Which is very interesting, because Beatrice in the main show, she has a very personal motivation to be involved with these kids. You know, at first it's so she can become human again, and then later it's because she does genuinely care about them. So it's very interesting to me how she sort of is fed up. And also the concept of a beast devouring lost travelers obviously comes back in the main series. I just thought that was very interesting how like little things like that throughout, and we'll get to this, especially with this next one, are very, very similar to what we ended up getting. So this next one is called Lovesick Millionaire. In the episode Lovesick Millionaire, Wirt and Greg stumble across exactly that. This extremely rich old man who is absolutely in love with this woman he keeps seeing visions of. He tells Wirt and Greg that they have to help him because if they don't, he'll die and he'll haunt them forever, which, once again, I think this is something we bring up in the original series, but the concept of dying while you're in the sort of middle, like while you're in limbo, is very weird to me. Certainly a concept to wrap your head around. But anyway, Wirt and Greg attempt to try and help the man. However, they keep getting thwarted by an extremely hairy man who's constantly getting in the way. They don't know what's going on. Is this hairy man a guardian? Is he secretly the millionaire who's like a two-faced maniac? They don't really know what's going on until eventually they learn that this beautiful woman that the man keeps seeing visions of is actually this hairy man. It turns out that this woman used to be engaged, but the mother of the man she was engaged to hated her so much that she cursed her to be hairy so her fiancé would leave her. Well, it turns out that this rich man is the fiancé, and he still longs for his old lover. Once they actually talk to each other and realize the misunderstandings, they end up, getting together and living happily ever after. This episode is obviously where they got some of the ideas for the episode with the going through that rich man's, I can't recall his name off the top of my head, but going through the mansion with the ghost lady that he keeps seeing that he's enamored with. Sort of that idea of, this very rich, eccentric old man being in love with a woman he can't get. And then in the end it ends up working out. I thought that was very interesting and kind of just a fun concept in general for an episode. The next episode is simply titled Nightmare. This episode is just a fun concept to me. It feels like an old fairy tale, like those old early versions of Cinderella where the twin sisters cut off their toes in order to fit into the shoes, like those kind of dark, twisted versions. Because in this story, Wirt and Greg are sleeping when this is in here, a skinless witch steals Greg and rides him out like a horse off into the night. Wirt basically finds out that she goes to this Puritan-like town, but he ends up getting captured as well. The only way that they're able to defeat her is by putting salt and pepper on her discarded skin, so that when she puts the skin back on, it burns her and they're able to escape. Which, that sounds like the most fun and interesting twisted fairy tale I've ever heard in my life. Like, I love that concept of this skinless witch stealing children in the night. It's such a spooky, fun idea that I can't get over. I wish we could have seen this in some way. It's fascinating. This next episode is called Goose Step, and Beatrice is mentioned in this episode, so I think when she left them very early on, she returns at some point or another. Just, to remember, these are very early outlines of episodes, so there's a lot of nuances here that we're missing. We're really just focusing on the concept. But basically, Wirt, Greg, and Beatrice find a band of musical animals being chased by hunters, and they decide that they want to help these animals. Well, it turns out that these hunters aren't in fact hunters, but soldiers. And the animals themselves also used to be soldiers. Basically, the moon cursed the animals for being not the animals, but the moon cursed these soldiers for being too loud at night, so he turned them into animals so they can't defend themselves. So now, Wirt and Greg must travel to the moon via a reflection in a pond in order to convince the moon to undo the curse. However, this backfires and turns everyone into animals. Wirt turns into either a bear or dog, nobody can tell which, and Greg becomes a duck. And this is likely the inspiration for one of the 2016 comics in the mini-series, specifically entry number 3. And I think that's such a fun idea. I am a little confused, the soldier thing is a little odd, but I love the concept of, I can totally see a scene where Greg is like, or where Wirt is like, how do we get to the moon? How do we do this? And Greg is like, look, it's right there in the pond. And then shoop, they go there. I think that's such a Greg moment, and I think that's very fun. I also think the idea of, musical animals is obviously that led to the Schooltown Follies episode, which, even more interesting, this next episode is called Farmtown Follies, and also has to do with them being animals, which I think Schooltown Follies, musical animals, I think that's like, I think it's so fun. We've talked about this in all of the cut content and like videos I've done like that, but I love seeing all the little pieces and how they ended up coming together exactly like this. So in this episode, Wirt and Greg have been turned into animals and they want to naturally go back. Greg is actually having fun because he's able to talk to his frog friend at this point, which is kind of a fun concept. But Beatrice, for some reason, doesn't recognize them and flies off, presumably to find the woodsman. Well, while Greg and Wirt are searching for the woodsman or Beatrice, they end up being captured by a farmer who thinks that they were rooting around on his crops. And it says here in parentheses, in truth, Greg does keep eating his crops, which is pretty funny as like a note. And basically the whole episode would be them escaping before they become dinner. So our main characters, who are still animals at this point, it's kind of weird to me that we would spend 3 episodes with them as animals. But basically they wind up in Frogland, and they are planning on just passing through until they meet Reginald Bliss, who, that's his name in this version, or Jason Funderburker's father. They end up having this debate of like, do we stay in Frogland or do we leave? Jason Funderburker basically doesn't know what to do if he wants to stay with Greg or not. However, the decision is made for him when his father escapes downstream because he is being chased by the Frogland police and he's a criminal. Jason Funderburker is obviously disappointed about this, but basically says that he thinks his dad will come back one day to help them return home. This is pretty interesting, this is likely the inspiration for the background premise of the 2017 comic miniseries, issues 12 through 16, where Greg Wirt and Jason Funderburker, in a dream in the unknown, encounter Jason Funderburker's dad, who is a criminal. So I think that's, once again, I know I went on that little rant earlier, I just love how everything comes back in that way. I think it's so much fun, and I think even though, this show would certainly be different, I still love every second of this, honestly. This next episode is called The Toad and the Wishing Well. This episode, once again, they're still animals, so this is a good chunk of the series where they are stuck as animals, which is a fun concept, but I feel like with the overall tone of the show, especially if this is still a mini-series, because at this point, this is a mini-series. This isn't going to expand for the 3 seasons that they initially wanted. So to spend this much time as animals, I think, isn't the best choice. However, in this episode, Wirt, Greg, and their frog, they end up finding this Toad King who lives in a cold wishing well. He's shivering and he's all cold and grumpy, and he says, I can grant you any wish you want, but I'm never going to do it because I already have everything I want. Wirt ends up really overthinking the whole thing. He's trying to figure out if there's some sort of riddle he can work out. Meanwhile, Greg ends up just chucking random things down the well, hoping that maybe he'll find something that the Toad King wants. Eventually they realize that the only reason he's so grumpy is because he's cold and shivering. So they get a spider to spin him a sweater and make him nice and cozy, and it works. However, Wirt realizes if they wish to go home, they will stay as animals. So he decides to wish for them to return to their human form. Gregory is very upset about this because that means he won't be able to talk to his frog anymore, so I'm sure there's some sort of emotional moment there. But overall, this is another one of those sort of fairy tale episodes that I really love about the series, that, there's a toad in a wishing well and the answer to the riddle is to give him a sweater. The next episode, entitled Ivory, sees the return of Beatrice, who is upset at the boys because she was, they think, from her perspective, they just disappeared. She's been searching for them for weeks. I do think Beatrice is not handled the best in this show, just because it's a lot of her being like, I'm done, okay, I'm back, oh, I'm leaving now. I feel like the introduction of Jason Funderburker being able to speak is also why, because, you have 2 different animal companions, and I feel like, that's kind of a crowd. 4 is a crowd when it comes to animals and their companions, I guess. But she returns and basically says, hey, here's how you get to the woodsman's house, and leaves again. Wirt overthinks her directions, and they end up going to a man's house called Mr. Whittles. a guy who carves ivory. And he promises to give them the directions to the woodsman's house, but after they spend the night. However, as time goes on, they learn the dark secrets of Mr. Whittles. They learn that he actually gets his ivory from the teeth and bones of the children that he kidnaps. Eventually, Wirt and Greg find that his basement is full of boneless children who they have to help escape, and they end up defeating Mr. Whittles, which, once again, another great Grimm's fairy tale, dark, spooky, you can hear the black train right now actually, Grimm's fairy tale, dark, secret kind of story. I love that so much, and I feel like that especially would fit right in with the main series, with the exception of Beatrice sort of just coming and going. Some people think that this became the inspiration for the Black Lantern and kind of the Beast as a whole, sort of taking these lost souls and harvesting their, harvesting them for materials. However, I disagree a little bit because Mr. Whittles isn't set up as like this primary antagonist. This next episode is entitled Home, and it's another very eerie, fun episode. In it, Wirt and Greg make it to the woodsman's home where they find a set of train tracks. They think, could this be the way home? The woodsman says, no, you're not ready yet, don't go down the train tracks, but Beatrice convinces them to go. They end up following the train tracks, and sure enough, they return home. However, as they continue living their lives, things are slightly wrong. However, as they continue to live their lives, things are slightly wrong. They notice on the TV there's only reruns. Small things are out of place. Nothing's quite right. They realize that this isn't actually the hometown. It's a projection of their memories of home. And the woodsman ends up guiding them back to his home and basically says that there's still a few more chapters for you to complete before you can return home. Which, that is such a fun episode, concept, to be back but not really be back. Kind of reminds me of the pilot to The Twilight Zone, that episode where the guy is in this town hallucinating that he's home because he was isolated for so long that he broke mentally. I think that tone is very interesting. This last episode is more of a concept than explaining what actually happens, but it's a very interesting idea. It's called Last Fair Deal Gone Down. In it, Wirt, Beatrice, and Greg find out that the woodsman is talking to this mysterious dark specter, and he's writing new chapters to the Tome of the Unknown, which means that the woodsman has been keeping them trapped here this whole time. This leads to them becoming determined to stop the woodsman and escape and steal the Tomb of the Unknown to end their story. Now, if this could have led to another season, certainly possible. They don't explicitly say in this outline that I'm reading that the story is over right here. However, I don't think this would be the best place for it to end because the Spectre character, granted, once again, these are very light outlines. The Beast was set up very well, in my opinion, in the initial Over the Garden Wall, in the main version. Maybe it's just because I'm reading an outline here. It doesn't feel like this Dark Spectre was set up in a great way. And it's also like, hey, if you meet the woodsman, why can't he just take it to his house so you guys can go through the chapters, whatever. I'm sure these are all things that would have been worked out within the show and when more detailed outlines come. Things like Beatrice sort of coming and going and not really having much to her story. I'm surprised they don't really delve into her that much because the mystery behind her and her motivations are some of the best parts of the original Over the Garden Wall, in my opinion. That sort of double-sided nature to her when you rewatch the show and realize at first she only views Wirt and Greg as a means to an end, but by the end she does genuinely care about them. I think all of the elements are here of a great show. If I read this and then they said, yep, we had another season planned where it would follow them trying to stop this woodsman and get the Tome of the Unknown back, I would be all for it. But if this was a one-season thing, I'd be a little mixed on it. I do think some of these episodes here, if you interchanged them with some from Over the Garden Wall, would have fit perfectly. The Ivory episode as well as the Skinless Witch episode are fantastic ideas that I would love to see, adapted into a full episode or even a short film. And overall, all this proves to me is that Patrick McHale is a fantastic writer and has just a beautiful mind when it comes to these sort of ethereal fairy tale-like stories. And I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope your November goes well. And let me know if you want me to cover more Over the Garden Wall ideas. There's plenty of theories about what is going on in the world of Over the Garden Wall that I would love to cover, especially in the month of November. That's really when I like to rewatch the series, in my opinion. And then also I've got that double exposure full review that I'm writing. I'm still taking some time to really digest it, and I'm going to start another playthrough soon. So I haven't really sat down and written it yet. It's going to be a little bit for that. But yeah, I hope you guys really enjoyed this video. I know it's a bit of a departure because I'm going into TV once again. But thank you guys so much for watching. I appreciate every single one of you, and I hope you have a good morning or evening or, whatever.